Hello and welcome to this episode of ABiQ's webinar series looking at transport opportunities and projects in Africa and looking at the investment in transport projects across the continent. I'm delighted to have with me today two distinguished members. I've got Alan and I've got Ashanaki with me, and I'll hand over to Alan first, maybe to just quickly introduce yourself, Alan.
Thanks, Emil. Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Clark. I'm a civil engineer by trade, and I've spent most of my career working on big port development projects in Africa, mainly in South Africa and Ghana. And that's really where my passion lies, is in port and coastal infrastructure. Logistical bottlenecks on the continent are generally start or end at the ports, and I have a huge interest in that aspect. I'm currently a director of Hulk Africa. We're a civil engineering and project advisory firm that work out of South Africa. And I'm excited about this discussion. It's close to my heart. And obviously, coming from an engineering background, I'm way more interested in the execution of projects, but I'm also really interested in what Emil and Ashanaki have to say about attracting investment and the larger economic problems with infrastructure on the continent.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Alan, Ashanaki, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Emil. And so, I'm really happy to join you on this interesting discussion and interesting issue. Yeah, hi, everyone. My name is Ashanaki. I'm from Ethiopia, and I just graduated my PhD in economics from Bielefeld University in Germany. So currently I'm working as a freelancer and a volunteer as a research associate for the Public Policy African Initiative. And yeah, just my interest is basically on the international trade and globalization and the labor market, especially in sub-Saharan African countries. And yeah, so just today's discussion will be just very interesting for me because it's obvious that one can see this issue from the economic development and international trade and so on. And it is very, I'm very excited to join and just to say something from my point of view and just to hear from Emil and Alan also. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ashanaki. So I'm going to start off by maybe just sharing a couple of points. And I'm looking at just the ABiQ, the pipeline of projects. For those of you who don't know that already, ABiQ obviously track and monitors activities and companies and people across the African and the Middle East continents, looking at what are the opportunities for, a lot of it is trade, but also in terms of project consulting and execution, effectively the entire project life cycle, from concept to delivery and operation and maintenance beyond that. So I'll just quickly share, and I thought of doing a presentation, but I think it's maybe got a bit more impact just looking at our live site. In terms of all the, and you can see in the filters at the top here, I'm just looking at projects in Africa, and I'm looking at all transport related projects. That's currently, some I've included on hold, but also stuff that's ongoing and upcoming. And just to get an overview of what is really in the pipeline. So we can see there's more than $300 billion worth of active transport projects, or mostly ongoing and upcoming, and we'll have a look at that now. So let's just go into the different various project stages in the project life cycle. So we can see here, under construction, $180 billion worth of transport infrastructure projects. And then you can see the entire pipeline from study, 50 billion, all the way through up to close to $9 billion that's currently in tender in the bidding stage. Looking at just in terms of ongoing, on hold and so on, so we can see there's our $180 billion that is ongoing, so under construction, upcoming, so pre-execution, $112 billion, and then we've got about 12 billion that's on hold or cancelled at the moment. Just looking at where are they and who the main players are, we kind of look at a theme here, and the interesting thing is if you look at 5% involvement in terms of the projects across the continent is China Civil Engineering Construction Corporation. Obviously as a role as a contractor, but then we have a list of other companies and entities below that, you know, ministries and so on. And that just gives us a quick feel of where's the main influences or the main players in the transport sector in Africa. If we just do it by count, just look at, you know, sometimes a big project can skew the data, but there we go. So African Development Bank, obviously from a financing point of view, involved with a lot of the projects in the transport sector across the African continent. If we go to countries, so which are the markets? My gut feel initially thought it would have been in Egypt, and it kind of is. If we look at top projects based on count, a lot of that work currently in the transport sector is in Egypt, followed by Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia. I think it's kind of what we kind of expect looking at Africa and where the active markets are. Just looking at it by value, changes around it quite significantly. So you can see there's obviously larger average value in terms of projects in some of the other sub-Saharan African countries, because obviously there's a bit of more of a spread when you look at it by value. In Nigeria and Egypt has got, again, the biggest market share. Nigeria more so in value than Egypt, which was surprising to me. And then we've got Kenya, Ghana, Zambia, Tanzania. It's, again, numbers that we kind of expected to see, excuse me, to see in Africa. What is interesting is to look at how far down South Africa is. It's only about, you know, 17th on the list. If you look at the main markets based on project value. If we go just, okay, industries ranking, no point in there because we're only looking at transport, but there you go. We've got our over $300 billion worth of active projects. Obviously, if any of you are interested in the numbers here, reach out to us, get in touch, and we can obviously help you with access to the platform to get some macro data as well. So that kind of sets the scene. I think Africa as a continent, we know, you know, we at 1.3 billion people, just African continent, you know, in 10 years time, or by 2050, sorry, in 10 years time, this is going to go up to about 1.6 billion people. So 300 million people added to the population over the next 10 years, going to increase demand on all aspects of infrastructure, not just obviously transport, healthcare. Food security, I think, is one that's prominent. We've seen issues now with COVID in 2020. And I think for me, food security is so extremely important, you know, for the well-being of the continent, but then also it is so directly, you know, it's directly impacted by transport infrastructure. We still have issues where crops rot in the field or does not reach market in time. You know, in this day and age, we simply cannot allow that, and that is as a direct result of the lack of proper transport infrastructure. So yeah, with that kind of background, I'd like to now just do a round, go back to Alan. We can kick off with you again, just in terms of the future demand. Where do you see it for transport infrastructure, and what is the importance or the impact on economic growth for any market or for the continent as a whole? Your views, Alan?
Thanks, Emil. Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about a lot of that data that you just showed us is how grouped it is, and I think that's a troubling thing as well. You know, you've got specific regions or specific countries spending quite a lot on infrastructure, when in fact you need the entire continent to become more connected. And you know, the African Development Bank has estimated the infrastructure deficit at between 130 and 170 billion dollars a year on the continent, and about a quarter of that is transport infrastructure. So you know, if you look at where the spend currently is, there are clear sort of areas where there's a huge lack of spend, and that's worrying because you know, I think that the growth in infrastructure needs to happen basically in two areas. Urban mobility needs to increase because people can't lead economically active lives without having urban mobility. And the second place where infrastructure spend needs to increase is on unlocking resource corridors, and whether that's natural resources, which the continent is well known for, or whether it's unlocking potential in, for example, agriculture that opens up corridors that gets, that allows an increase in exports, where you can get food from the agricultural zones to a port that allows for massive exports. And so those are sort of the two areas where I see the biggest growth needed. And yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, you can't really talk about the growth of transport infrastructure without talking about changing demographics and changing population sizes. The continent's having, going to still be growing in 20 years' time. The population is going to be growing. There's going to be an increased number of young people. Interestingly, there's probably going to be a way bigger middle class. And so, there are going to be more cars on the roads. There's going to be increased spending on retail and luxury goods. And that all drives up infrastructure, particularly on, when you're talking about ports and rail and road networks. Yeah, so that's my 2 cents worth there.
Thanks for that. Alan, Ashanaki, from your point of view, I mean, you've done all the theory behind this now. What is your take on critical importance and growth of transport infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you so much, Emil. Yeah, I think you both raised very important points with regard to like the transportation infrastructures. It's really important to understand that just how it contributes to the economic growth of a country, as well as like the whole continent, and in facilitating the mobility of the people, as well as also the product. As we all know, the main economic contributor for the African continent, especially for sub-Saharan Africa, is the agriculture, and it's the main player in the GDP of the country. So it's very important that just there is a transportation facilitation to bring the agricultural product from the farm area to the market, or just to the customer. And so just it could play a great role in bringing this product to the market, as well as also just in facilitating the export. And there are the reports that shows the transportation facilitation can increase the cost of export, and also like just the delay. For example, just if there is a 1-day delay in the product, it increases the price of the export by half. And so just it means it can also like just facilitate the reduction in the price of the food product, or just the agricultural product in the market area. And so just at the same time, just we all know that Africa is mainly importing the most of its product from the foreign countries. So just the road transportation, or just like the rail transportation availability, can reduce the price of the import, and it can promote the trade. And from the other point of view, one can also just look at the interconnectedness of the member countries in sub-Saharan African countries, which is really poor. And this can be also just reflected by the intra-trade in the continent, which is less than 3%. And so if like one wants to increase the intra-trade between, or just among the member countries, there should be a huge investment in the in connecting the countries, which is very very poor.
And can I ask you a question there, Ashanaki? What
sure.
The main means would be? Would you say, meaning, do you think we need to build more highways, or do you think we need to connect through rail? Is there a preference, or do you think strategically the one is better than the other, or should it be both?
Yeah, actually, this is like a very important question, because as we know, just for African countries, this transportation investment is a huge investment. And yeah, for example, the World Bank report shows that by 2030 alone, like just the annual investment should be around 130 billion in sub-Saharan African countries, which is a huge investment. So just, we need to like prioritize just which, from the cost point of view and also just from the economic point of view. And it might be also just very hard for individual countries to make this huge investment to connect with the neighboring country. So just this need cooperation and like a detailed discussion among the countries. And here is where the regional organizations and the international organizations like African Union, European Union, or even just the foreign aid from China, which is the main the main investor in the infrastructure in Africa, can play a huge role in bringing this. So just the main thing is like this, which is the priority from the cost point of view, as well as also just from the economic point of view. Is it like the highways or just the railways? Yeah, just maybe now it's really hard just to say we need to make a huge investment on the highway or just the railways. Just it needs like the cooperation among the countries, like especially the neighboring countries, and also just the role that the international organizations and the regional organizations could play.
Has there any studies been done that you know of on, what is that priority, or that, is there anything out there that said, listen, we need to prioritize in terms of transport infrastructure through rail, because it's the most efficient way to get bulk from one point to the other, and then look at, micro networks from trucks and whatever else that you use to distribute further, or should we build massive highways from east to west? Is anything like that been done before? Do we know?
Yeah, there is, okay, I have seen this, I think yesterday, just a study which deals with the Chinese infrastructural development. And yeah, just this shows basically, okay, just they did some kind of regression with railway, highways, and like the air transportation. And they find like the higher significant impacts of railways on the economic development of the country. And that's like just the internal, not just with the other country, like internally.
Okay.
So just yeah, the railways plays a role because just it can carry just a lot of loads for you, and just it can transport the product easily. Yeah, just it can do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. Alan, any points from your point of view on that, just in terms of, prioritizing? I know you deal with ports, so you might be a bias towards ports, but, ports typically by association means export, and it could be, the point is from a port you export not just to
yeah, well, I think, the interesting thing about
in the continent, yes.
Yeah. No, I think the interesting thing about ports is that they always serve as the gateway. So, they've got to connect to either a really efficient road network or really efficient rail network for them to be efficient. And, I think the rail networks unlock huge potential, but they come at a big cost. And I think that's why Africa has been slow on developing really efficient rail networks, is because they are expensive. They're more expensive than road networks. They don't provide the interconnectivity for humans as efficiently. But the flip side, I think the flip side of that is that, like ports, it's easy to incentivize investment in them because you can generate steady revenue streams from them. Whereas road networks, when you toll roads, it feels like a tax on citizens. And so, I think there's a very strong investment case and development case for improved planning of rail networks in the continent. But I think the major hurdle on that is that it requires that, really high level planning and cooperation between governments or regions to get it right, because it doesn't really help to unlock a single country's rail potential. I think, yeah.
was kind of my comment that I wanted to make on that, is that we talk about, yes, it is expensive, we know that, but it's, you know, building a 5-lane highway or a 3-lane highway between, you know, capital cities and foreign countries is also not a cheap thing. You know, it is also.
No, exactly.
I think there's probably an argument to say that rail should be on par to an extent, depending on the scope. Fair enough. But do you think, how much is the lack of a parent sponsor playing, you know, contribute to the lack of investment? So in other words, there is no African Union that is mandated to go and develop infrastructure across the continent. All the countries subscribe to it and support it, and there's a plan that's drafted and executed. You know, it's you need that one body that takes accountability and responsibility. There's no point me as country A building a fancy railway to my border, and then even though I've made an agreement with my neighbor B, he doesn't do the same, then I'm kind of stuck. You know, this investment has gone in, but doesn't go anywhere. Is there a need for such a player, for a driver in the transport sector? And I like the point that you've made. You know, it's easier to invest in rail than in road infrastructure, because there's actually a business case for it. You know, road infrastructure, you know, you can argue this day and age, do we need to commute anymore? You know, COVID has taught us you don't really need to, you know, maybe now and again, but you don't need that massive investment in road, because with infrastructure, you could scale that down or back. But if you've got a well-developed and managed rail network, it could solve a lot of your problems. And then, you know, you need certain elements to get in and out, but or maybe, as we've said earlier, you need a certain level of domestic road network so you can get your fresh projects to the market, which I think is critical. But sometimes I find that the focus is on some countries, they'll focus on how do we reduce commuters' time rather than improve efficiency of goods being transported, which is a subtle difference, but a massive, you know, make a big impact. So I guess just back to my question about, do we need a driver for Africa's transport infrastructure sector? Is that the way to do it? Should we get one parent body that can drive it across the continent?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Ashanaki will have his views on this as well, but I believe that's a really important part of delivering successful infrastructure on the continent. You have to have someone who's doing the high-level planning and coordination of that infrastructure, and standardizing things like the investment that flows into the infrastructure, attracting that investment, because, you know, if you've got an accountable organization behind it, making sure that the projects or programs are getting executed properly, it immediately attracts investment. And the other thing is from a more technical point of view, there needs to be a standardization of you know, standards. It doesn't help you have a narrow gauge rail in one country and a wide gauge in another, and, you know, then you sit with problems of, you know, a massive you know, you know, inefficiencies in the networks, and different trains having to run on different gauges, and those become bottlenecks in the supply chain then. So yeah, I mean, I think that, and I guess the hope is that the AU is going to play that role. You know, I think that there's huge potential for them to focus on unlocking those opportunities. You know, on bringing together infrastructure programs in regions. I don't think it's wise to do it across the continent. I think you need to look at specific regions, for example, the SADC region, and do regional planning, and then link those regions up where possible. But, you know, it's easier from a business case perspective to make those arguments that, you know, you're unlocking potential with neighboring countries and trading opportunities, rather than trying to do it on a continent-wide basis. Yeah.
Ashanaki, your view, what is the role of the AU? Is that the body, or is there talks amongst AU members of playing that role?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so just to emphasize on this issue of like a single player or just a body that can play a role in coordinating this issue. I did a kind of like a mini research paper on the African continental free trade area. It's hindrance, like just the problem that might affect its implementation. And one of the problem that I really found is the connectedness of the countries, and which leads to the poor intracontinental trade. And so just the main solution, or just like one of my recommendation, is like the agreement should have, or just like the organization should have a body which deals with facilitating connecting the continent in any means of transportation, as to facilitate the interconnectedness of the countries, or just like country A to country B. As Alan say, it might be like the regional coordination or just even the continental wise coordination, but it's really important that either the AU or just the African Free Trade Agreement or just area should play a role in this aspect. And from the EU point of view, yeah, I think there are some kind of cooperation between Africa and the European Union, just in order. In 2018, they have launched the African European Alliance for Sustainable Investments and Jobs. And this agreement, or just like this thema has like 3 task forces, and one of the task force is dealing with the transportation in Africa, focusing on the connectivity and infrastructure, road safety, as well as like the aviation. So just from the EU point of view and like the African Union point of view, there is some kind of ongoing agreement which might not be like just fully operational on the ground. So I think that there could be some potential ways to go with the European Union and the African Union. And also just there is this Marshall Agreement, which main focus is also just to play a role in building and developing the infrastructure in connecting the countries in Africa. And I hope just this could solve the problem with interconnectivity. And just since most of African countries are like just some of the African countries are like landlocked country, and this could play a role.
Yeah, I mean, I think, sorry, just Emil, just to follow on from what Ashanaki is saying, is that I think, if anything, the African Free Trade Agreement, is the first foot in the door, the opening of the door to discussions around how to connect countries and regions better. And so you hope that, through that agreement, either the AU or another body plays the role of doing the planning and attracting the investment necessary for those types of initiatives. But I mean, I think it's a clear sign from African countries that they agree that there's improved planning and improved coordination needed in regions and between countries to unlock economic potential.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, with the launch of the ACTFO, last year, I think was the main launch and drive of it. There certainly is a need, and hopefully that we should see a bit more, coordination about the different countries, and at least hopefully discussions at a body at a certain level where they can start planning, just to see how it all comes together. Because without these transport, or without the transport network, it's difficult to do. Doesn't matter what kind of free trade agreement is in place. It's still difficult to get goods from one point to the other. Moving on to another point, shall we talk about a bit about is there, just quickly, any specific inhibitors for investing in transport infrastructure? I mean, what is the reason? Is it why hasn't it been done? I mean, there's been, Africa has been looking at developing the continent for, a number of decades, but why are we where we are?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about a couple of them already. One is there's no structured sort of regional planning, which we've talked plenty about now. And the other is we talked about the business case. There's got to be to attract investment, there's got to be some sort of revenue stream. And it's a lot easier to do with certain infrastructure. So with ports, the terminal operators can charge the big shipping companies to load and unload the vessels. And with rail, the rail operator can charge to transport cargo, but it gets a lot more difficult with road networks, like I said, because citizens feel like they're being taxed personally every time they drive through a toll road. I think the e-toll system in South Africa was a prime example of that. It very much fell flat on its face because people just refused to pay the tolls and just weren't happy with the system that had been put in place. And then,
what about
I guess airports are similar to seaports in that the operating companies charge taxes to the big airliners or the carriers to operate out of their ports. So there are good business cases for those, and I think that's why you see a number of successful airports on the continent. And growing airliners coming out of the continent. I think Ethiopia Airlines is a classic example. I've got a couple of other points on investment, and I think there are ways of attracting investment, and one of them is looking at how projects or programs are set up. And I think where there is, and it becomes quite a politically sensitive topic, but where there is private organization involvement, you generally find that there are projects or programs that are executed with more accountability, and that lead to successful infrastructure being developed. So I'm a big fan of the Triple P project sort of execution model, where it attracts the necessary investment, it delivers infrastructure for the government that will eventually be owned and operated by the government, but it also leads to a level of accountability during the execution of the project, which is a very important part, and then during operations. Yeah.
Excellent, thanks. Ashanaki, from your point of view, I don't think if you have anything else to add, I think we've been reasonably thorough.
Okay. I think there are some couple of problems, like why we are where we are now, and just few of the points are like just if we see most of the countries in Africa, the roads that we have are just mainly the one which were like maybe just founded or just installed by the colonial era with different purposes. And since then, there is just a minor development, even just according to the World Trade Organization report, there are just a few new roads just compared to the other developing countries in sub-Saharan African countries specifically. And that's maybe just something to do with like the institutional problem, or just like the institutional framework, where just there is no appropriate way of like financing the transport infrastructure, and no inappropriate managing system, and even just the maintenance system, as well as like just the policy is not that much efficient. And so just there has to be something done with regard to like just establishing the strong institutional framework to handle the financing, managing, and the policy with regard to the road or just the overall transportation infrastructure. And the other thing is like just lack of prioritizing and or just simply doing the road project because yeah, just everyone understand it's really important, but at some point from the cost point of view, as well as also just from its economic point of view, there should be a priority and just it's not like just the road transportation is not something that you have to show you have to do as a showcase. It has to be it has to have some importance for the economic development of the country and the continent. And the other problem with the most of the African countries is like there is this problem of land acquisition and the environmental impact from the environmental point of view, as well as also like the geographical landscape of the country makes it the continent, not only the country. Just for example, like just if we take Ethiopia, it's just a lot of like mountains and so on. So just it needs a high cost in order to like just invest in building a road or just a railway in such geographical positions. And yeah, so just there are different different issues. And the other point that I want to raise here is also like the way we can generate a revenue from the road. I don't think there is like this a really well developed model in which the countries generate revenue from the road. For example, like just from the highways, there are some kind of there's some way of charging the people, and the other ways maybe just that is included in the tax or something. But just there is no clear way of like generating the revenue from the road or just from the railways in order to like finance the maintenance or just the in reinvesting that revenues in another new road. So just this could be some of the problem, in addition to like the strong institutional problem, which includes also corruption. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I think I kind of agree with all that you've mentioned, and I do think though maybe we had an opportunity where Africa needs to come up with its own solution. Because maybe we do not need all the road transport infrastructure that the US or the Europe or whoever else had. Focus more on the rail, more of a hub and spoke maybe approach. You can fly into the country next door, and then smaller networks. And I think the exception for me from a transport or from a road network point of view is, like I've said before, is agriculture, because we need to get produce to market. I think that is critical across the continent. Right, so let's move on to the next point, and in terms of what is required to deliver a successful transport infrastructure projects. What should be done? How do we execute? And I know, Alan, you're quite passionate about that, so I'm going to hand over to you to kick that one off.
Yeah, Emil. I mean, it's definitely where my passion lies. We've touched on sort of the key areas going through the talk now. For me, it's all about coordinated efforts. Whether that's at a provincial level, a regional level, or a country level, you need to have coordinated planning efforts that look at your overall transport programs and say, okay, these are the low-hanging fruit projects where we can make high impact by implementing these 3 or 4 projects in this program, and then you slowly develop an overall program that is based on needs and unlocking the greatest potential for the least the smallest cost. And then that deals with the high level planning and the structuring of the different programs. But then you get into the actual execution of the projects. And when you're looking at infrastructure projects, they're typically mega projects. You won't come across many transport infrastructure projects that are under $2 billion in value, just because of the pure scale of them. And with that comes a lot of risk. And so, you know, risk management on those projects becomes a key component of it. And if you look at the track record of mega projects globally, it's horrific. You know, they're always running late and they're always dramatically over budget. And it makes it a very hard business case to sell if you can't guarantee investors that they're not going to have to fork out another 50% to complete the project. And so, you know, somehow measures need to be put in place to manage those risks. And when you talk about risks, they're two. It's time and cost, and they're two factors that creep in. And the one is an optimism bias. People who have executed projects think that they can execute them faster and more cheaply than they actually can. And the other one is a political bias. And the political bias is basically stakeholders involved in the project misrepresent the project. So they either overpromise on delivery or lie about things like project schedule and cost for their own interests. And if you can put structures or project management approaches in place that deal with those risks, and that the project stakeholders understand those risks, then you dramatically reduce the chances of those mega projects being unsuccessful. And I define an unsuccessful project as one where you know, schedules and budgets have been dramatically overshot.
Yeah, I think I mean, been fortunate to live in Dubai, obviously 20 years now, and I've seen how the city has grown. And I think one of, you know, we always look at what is the success of a place like Dubai or Abu Dhabi or Singapore, and I think that is there's number one, there's got to be a will at the top. You know, the leaders of the country they need the will to make a change. And I sometimes wonder, you know, whether that exists in certain leaderships. But again, we've seen the evidence. You know, you can go and look at the city-state like Singapore, or come to Dubai and have a look at what has been done. You know, in the space of 20 years in the middle of a desert, it's absolutely phenomenal. So again, it absolutely comes from the top in terms of leadership. Yeah, okay, maybe it differs politically here to other parts of the world, but nonetheless, I've been significantly impressed by places like Rwanda. I mean, I don't know, you know, for those who's been fortunate to visit that, it really made an impression on me, looking at where it was in '94 to where it is today. You know, it's there is a will to make a change. You know, there is at the top, and that unfortunately filters through. You know, if somebody has decided, or the leadership has decided, this is what we're going to do for the people, and this is the best way to do it, then, you know, one way or the other, they find a way to deliver. And I think that's one of the key things that we need in all these African countries and regions, is we need people that lead, and not just manage, which tends to happen most of the times. Ashanaki, from your point of view, what do we need to deliver successfully?
Yeah, so you both mentioned really important issues, and we need the coordination, the coordinated effort, which is really important, as well as also we need someone who leads, not only manage. That's also like the important point that we have to underline. And at the same point, yeah, we also need, yeah, as we all know, it's really difficult for most of African countries to finance or to fund the big road or like railway investments in order to connect the countries. And so the players, specifically like the World Bank, the African Development Bank, or from the country point of view, I think China is the main player in transportation infrastructure in Africa. So they should also play, or they execute their responsibility appropriately. And yeah, there are some reports which shows almost between 25 and 35% of the funding from World Bank and the Chinese just their destination is the same, or just they are like just they focus only on some regions of the continent. And just the most surprising thing is just those fundings are mainly to invest on the road construction within the country, even not like just connecting the countries in the continent. So just there should be some kind of like prioritizing funding from not only like just from the country or just like from the regions in Africa, but also from these stakeholders like the World Bank or just the Chinese aid or even the African Development Bank. And so just for this, I think just there should be, again, like just what I want to emphasize is someone who just take a responsibility, and just there should be some kind of department in the African Union or just in the African Free Trade Agreement. There should be some kind of department which can coordinate these things. And yeah, then this is like my point, or just this is what we have to do as a continent.
Excellent. I think in terms of means of procurement, we've spoken, I think Alan has mentioned PPP as well. Yeah. I'm a kind of a big fan of that, specifically because you get private sector who's got skills and expertise to deliver. Let them do that. You've got private funding coming in. At the end of the day, ownership eventually reverts back to government. It could be a different conversation whether it actually should fall back to them. I think private sector knows how to efficiently run and operate, and these as businesses. But I do think that we need to prioritize in terms of what makes the most sense. I kind of like that approach. And then obviously, yeah, we need a drive and buy-in from the top, all the stakeholders, and there needs to be a will. There needs to be a political will to deliver world-class infrastructure to African countries and Africa as a whole, and we need it. Difficult to quantify what would be the growth, but I mean, I guess what we can see, or what we, is the benchmark, look at what is GDP per capita for various African countries and go and look at what it is for developed countries. That is kind of the opportunity or the shortfall and the gap that we need to make up. Yeah. And we do know that the resources exist in Africa. So, and the intellectual capital needs to be developed and so forth. And there's obviously case studies that we can look at where it's been done extremely well in Africa, and we just need to learn how to roll that out across the continent. Right, so I think we kind of ran through most of our agenda today. So I think one of the questions that I just would like to open up now to the floor is anybody that wants to ask Alan or Ashanaki specific questions, or, on their views on the transport sector in Africa. One question that has come up is, I think we kind of touched on this, is the global air transport system. I think there's obviously ways that they look at how to make it environmentally friendly, because I guess air transport don't necessarily, probably not a great example of how to move bulk people and goods necessarily at in a way that is best for the environment. But I don't know, any views from you, Alan, in terms of transport? I know a port is a port, I guess, to a certain extent. It's just different things.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with air travel is that it will remain expensive, and so it's efficient for high value goods, and high value goods are expensive commodities or goods and people, and so it's really good for those cases. And I think there is an argument to be made for a stronger air network on the continent. If you look at the African continent, it's very well connected south to north, but quite poorly connected east to west. And so, there is a case for a stronger air network in Africa. And I think that'll come with time as we get more prominent carriers on the continent looking to expand their market. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting discussion, but I think it will remain expensive compared to, traditional networks like seaports and interland connections using road and rail.
Good. Ashanaki, anything from your side, specifically looking at air networks?
Yeah, I think yeah, Alan mentioned important point with regard to this issue, and again, just it comes to like just the issue of prioritization, given that the the resource that the continent has. And yeah, just so which sector or just which transportation contributes more to the economic development, or just like in alleviating the poverty in the continent. And yeah, just given, for example, like just the research done on China, still a railway and road construction, or just the roads play a major role. So that's why only just we have to like give a priority. But this doesn't mean the air transportation is less significant. It plays also significant role in like transporting the people, or also just like it, especially it saves you time, you know, just to to transport also like the perishable agricultural product, or just the product that you need to that can like with the time that it can help. And but again, just my point of view is just a matter of priority, just for which sector we have to like give much emphasis and just much priority, from which just we need like we can generate a high economic benefit in the short run, and in the medium and the long run. And yeah, so just every aspect of transportation plays a significant role in the economic development of the country, but it's a matter of prioritization.
I think the one thing to maybe mention on top of that is the role employment is going to play. And I think they're huge, way bigger. There's way bigger potential in employing a huge portion of the continent's labor on developing large rail and road networks than an airport, where it's a relatively small localized project, and the airplanes are constructed in the States or the EU or wherever. So, you know, yeah, 2 cents worth there.
I mean, I think it is. I mean, there's a different conversation to be had as well. I mean, I know focus on transport, but we've got, you know, all the natural resources you can think of is on the African continent, yet all the countries is kind of in the short winds, where they just want to dig it out of the ground and ship it out. You know, I think we need to certainly start focusing on processing locally. You know, if we have, you know, more refined and processed materials that we can actually form part of the ACFA agreement, you know, inter-Africa, and then having manufacturing and industrial plants in other places where there is, you know, easy and affordable access to energy, which they kind of need. You know, that's why you need a lot of the high intensity in terms of power to process these materials into finished goods, which we as a continent, you know, can then export rather than having to import at the end, you know, come back to your airplanes. No reason why we can't manufacture components of aircraft in Africa, for sure. And then, so yeah, I think that's a broader spectrum as well. And I think we need to, you know, we've seen some elements of it in Tanzania. There were some examples where certain goods weren't allowed to be exported anymore. You had to process it to a certain stage before you can export it further, which, you know, and sometimes a lot of these policies are considered negative, or, you know, or portrayed negative. But at the end of the day, you know, developing refining facilities for steel or whatever materials it is, you know, in their own country creates opportunities for just constructing, then operation and maintenance of those facilities. Then you have a higher value of having higher value goods that you can export at the end of the day. It's part of your GDP growth. Yeah, that's by definition what we should be doing. And then again, countries is only going to invest, or companies are only going to invest in setting up those plants if the infrastructure exists to move it. So, which comes back again to the transport infrastructure. But yeah, so just a quick question came in, having a look at airports as well. So I thought I would just quickly share my screen again for those interested, looking at transport. So this is specifically looking at airports across the African continent. So we can see we have about $7.5 billion worth of projects under construction. with another 7 billion in pre-execution, so coming up to the market. If we want to look at main players, we're going to have Ethiopian there we go, ADP Engineering, Ethiopian Airlines, Qatar, obviously investing in Africa as well. So some of the big players, we've got the Export-Import Bank of China, obviously providing funding and so on. Looking at which countries are investing, I guess Ashanaki, you could have guessed Ethiopia will be at the top of the list, followed by Angola, Nigeria, Rwanda, and so on, in terms of the top countries. There was also a question about ports. So let's just go down here and say, let's look at seaports as well. Let me just find this. Here we go. So there we have, let me just look at the list quickly. We got 28 billion, so almost $29 billion worth of projects. If we look at the stages, we can see close to 19 billion is under execution, with another 8 billion in pre-execution phase. And then they just look at where's the big players and ports. Nigeria Ports Authority, China Harbour, so again on construction side. And then just looking at which countries are investing in ports at the moment. There we go, so Nigeria, Angola, Ghana, Egypt, and so forth, Senegal. So that's kind of the questions that we've had so far. I think just last round is where do you think we will be in 10 years' time? What is the conversation we're going to have? Are we going to see a lot of investment in rail, in ports, airports, road infrastructure? Where do you think the transport sector is going to head over the next 10 years? Ashanaki?
Yeah, thank you. I think just what I'm too optimistic when it comes to not only just the road or just like the transportation infrastructure in Africa, but overall the African economic performance. So in 10 years, I think just I hope like just we will have much better developed transportation infrastructure with a well-connected well-connected countries, so that like just given the objective of the African Free Trade Agreement, we can boost also like the intracontinental trade, the trade flows among the African countries, and which is currently much way less than like the world average, which is just less than 3%. So just hoping that like with the objective of the agreement, I hope just this would play a role. And I think just we will have a well-connected continent in the next, at least we can see the initial investment, or like just the beginning of some big projects which connect the not only the neighboring country, but also like this the different region of the continents. And that's like just what I can see, and I'm too optimistic, I think, yeah, just with this aspect. Yeah,
thank you for that. Alan, where are we going to be in 10 years' time?
Yeah, Emil, I think I'm a little bit more pessimistic than Ashanaki. I think 10 years is a really short space of time when you're looking to execute these big projects. And I think over the next 10 years, it's predominantly going to be driven by import requirements. I think there's going to be continued spend on big port developments. And I think those will largely be connected to the hinterland by road, road projects. And I think most of that will happen on a regional level. I think there's going to remain disconnectivity between different regions, but I think the countries that are investing heavily in port infrastructure now will end up connecting to neighboring countries predominantly via road, with rail going into the really high value areas where there's large populations or projects resource-driven projects to support the investment. Yeah.
Last question with a simple yes, no, if you don't mind. Do you think we'll have a single authority that will drive transport infrastructure, either regional or on a continent level?
In the next 10 years?
Yeah.
Or just in general? Not in the next 10 years, I don't think, no.
Ashanaki?
Yeah, I have just some hope of like this. I think just like if we see the progress that's going on with regard to the African Free Trade Agreement, yeah, there might be like just some sort of body who can understand this is like one of the main problem, and then come to play the role as a single entity to solve this problem. So I hope in the next 10 years we will have a kind of a body which is either responsible to the like under the African Union or just under the African Free Trade Agreement that could play a role. So this is just my view.
Well,
it's a long yes or no.
We'll invite you back in 10 years' time. We'll make a note of it, and then we have this conversation and see where we are.
Okay. Perfect.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, our time has run out. It is just after 3 o'clock. Thank you very much for your participation and certainly contributions to this discussion. And I would like to thank everybody that has dialed in and listened in. And hope to have you back on another episode of one of our webinars looking at transport in the near future. Thank you very much, Alan, Ashanaki.
Thank you very
Cheers,
much.
guys. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.